Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, and good morning, George. How are you, man?
G'day, mate.
You can't say we're not going to talk about that today and then throw that out there like it's something that we should be talking about. How are you?
So good. Yep, all good.
I don't want to freak you out too much there, George. But for the first time ever, I started the show in the wrong order. So I pushed live first, and then I pushed the theme music. That. So we're sitting there about this.
Yeah. I saw the little flash of us.
So first time we've done that, but it was going to happen at some stage, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, good to be back with you. Hope everyone is well. Hope you are well, George. We were just having a little bitch before we came onto the camera about, these bloody Gen Zs and they're not adhering to rules about freaking COVID. I saw yesterday in the Deep South, not to get onto this, it's not really a topic for today, that we were between 900 and 1,000 new cases, which is 3 times what the safe limit's supposed to be. Schools are still not enforcing masks. And I was talking to my sister in Auckland this morning. She gave me a call, and it's really simple. It's like the experts are saying, get on with your life and wear a mask. Just get on with your life and wear a mask. Get on with your life and wear a mask. And that's what you need to do. And if you do that, we all can pretty much return to the new normal. What if the new normal is and wear a mask for the next 10 years, George? What then?
Yeah, that's sad, but
it could be.
Yeah. I'm totally preparing myself for that mentally.
Yeah. But if it is what it is,
it is what it is.
It is what it is. And if we want to be safe and we want to not get COVID, or else do we just throw all caution to the wind and go, well, we'll just get it? Because I have to be honest with you, I've gone from the attitude that it's actually not that difficult not to get this thing because you have sort of autonomy and control and you can control your environment, to now everyone around us kind of loosening up those boundaries. I'm kind of now more in the camp of maybe we're just all going to get it. And I haven't said that before, but I'm like, maybe I finally come to the dark side or something like that. Anywho,
it's a sort of indication of just how fed up, I guess, you're getting, or frustrated.
Well, just because as well, it's actually quite a simple solution. It just involves sort of community and caring for one another and restricting yourself for a short period of time. Actually, it could be dealt with. So it's just, you were talking about looking people around the university, and I've seen people walking around university and stuff. And it's just, it's for many, it's just gone back to normal. Talking to my kids about being at their schools, it's for a percentage, 20% of the school kids, they're just, every day is normal. And then on some level, you kind of go, of course, they're kids, get on with it. You can't help it. But the reality is that is why this thing is going to stick around. It's because of the people taking risk is the reason it was. So for everyone who's sick of it, including the younger people and the students and that sort of thing, the reason it will still be here in 6 months' time on something, any kind of significant way, is because of the people being overly relaxed right now.
I have a friend in Wellington who is a early childhood teacher, and she showed us a photo of her class, and all the kids are wearing masks still. It's because they sort of feel important. They like to wear their masks because it sort of makes them feel like they're
like a ninja.
Sort of, yeah.
It's interesting about that as well, because we always talk about how, well, when I say we, society talks often about anonymity and not wanting to be in front of all these cameras around town, and there's security cameras, all that kind of stuff. That mask actually does a lot of those things. And if you're like this, then you're out in winter and you're like this,
yeah, it's awesome. I love it.
I once read a report by some people talking about fashion, that if you're over 40 and you own a hoodie, you should be embarrassed with yourself. And I just went, move to Dunedin, love. Come to
Yeah.
Dunedin, have a chat with us here about having hoodies. I wear hoodies because they're warm. And when I take the dog out to the park or whatever, and there's that wind whipping around my neck, I flip my hoodie up. Anyway, interesting show today. We have got a guest coming up. We have got the president from, let me get the name of the association correct, the National Council of Women of New Zealand, coming on to talk to us at about 1:45. She's going to be talking to us, not necessarily about the Roe versus Wade conversation going on, because that's still sort of an ongoing conversation, but she's going to talk to us about, women, healthcare, rights to access things like abortions and healthcare for themselves. So she's going to talk about us about that aspect of it. So that'll be coming up in sort of the last third of the show. We're also going to be, and we started this conversation a little bit yesterday, we're going to be talking a bit about the Māori Party co-leadership arrangement, because it seems that something that they mooted a wee while ago is now being put in place. I read it as that it's now part of their agenda. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's now put in place. And also, what's the other thing? Oh yeah, old Uncle Winnie. We'll talk about Uncle Winnie as well. And yes to your answer in the private chat there, George. By the way, that's all done. Uncle Winnie. In fact, maybe we start with Uncle Winnie. Should we start with Uncle Winnie? I think we probably should. Winston Peters. Look, I have to tell you, I've been involved with Winston Peters several times.
William Winston.
He's been on my various broadcasts and radio shows and podcasts and stuff numerous times, including doing a podcast with him just before the last election. It's funny, I did a podcast with him just before the last election, and he's, I guess, much like any politician, sort of have organizers and handlers around them to set up all this stuff. And I hadn't spoken to him for probably a decade. And I look like this now, and I didn't look like this last time. And I popped up on the screen in front of him, and I saw him look off camera and go, "That's not Pat," because I look more like a mountain man now versus the last time he probably interacted with me. And so there was that confusion between putting the name and the face together for a while. And then we started talking. But so Winston Peters is, let me just say, for people who haven't done this, he's fun to talk to. He's fun to talk to in the media, but he is difficult. He's difficult. He makes it difficult. He makes conversations difficult. He is the master of not answering questions. He is the master of saying, and he does it in this conversation we're about to say, he's the master of saying, just you wait and see what happens. Just you wait and see what happens. It's going to happen, and then do nothing. I had a podcast with him once, probably 2011 election, where he, on my podcast, and it was actually news that was picked up by other media sources, threatened to sue, I want to say David Farrar, I think, because I think, and I could be wrong with that, but I think it was David Farrar. You can probably Google Winston Peters sue David Farrar Newstalk ZB, and you'll probably find it, George. Because David Farrar had released some polling result that ultimately Winston doesn't agree with, which is all polling results pretty much until he gets in. And he was saying it was influencing people and yada, 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 yada. Anyway, so he threatened on my show that the lawyers were going to be involved and that he was going to be, he would find out what was going on. And then nothing happened, never did anything. So this is a tactic. I don't know if just Winston uses it, but it's a tactic that Winston uses a lot, where he says, you wait and see what's going to come. You just wait. It's going to happen to them. I'm going to do X, Y, Z to them. And then more often than not, he seems to not do anything. But from a broadcaster point of view, he is fun to talk to, because he pushes back and he gives back, and he's good to talk to about it. Now, obviously, you'll all be aware that the reason we were talking about Winston, or talking about the topic, is that he was served with a trespass notice for Parliament grounds for being at the anti-vaxxer protest. He was on, I'm actually, this show here that we're looking at right now that you can see on your screen is on a channel called Eden. Eden is owned by Discovery, and they are now running an 8 p.m. news break. So they've got their main TV3 news at 6 o'clock. TV3 does a news at about 10:30. And then at 8 p.m. they do another news, and it's on Eden. And to be honest with you, I've never seen it yet, but I do keep an eye on the internet and on YouTube. So these clips have come across my page a few times. Now, one thing about Winston is, I would say he's quite a proud man. Some would use the term arrogant. But I would say it's fairly obvious to me that if you get things wrong or you don't give him his due credit, he reacts poorly. I was involved with a radio station where he turned up to the front desk to come and do an interview with me prior to an election, and the person at the front desk didn't know who he was. And so therefore Winston was like, oh, I'm going for an interview upstairs. Da, da, da. And they were like, well, you have to sign in, we need to know who you are. And obviously he was like, well, he didn't say this, but he was like, who the fuck do you think I am? That kind of vibe. And that did not go well because he wasn't paid his due credit. So let me just suggest for this interviewer, when you start an interview like this.
Kia ora, good evening. Former Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters has been trespassed from...
Did you pick that up, George? Did you pick up the small error there? Should we go again? Here we go.
Kia ora, good evening. Former Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters has...
Now, it's a mistake. It's a little gaffe. It's an error, but no big deal. You introduce your story. The problem is, if he's sitting there waiting and you introduce him like that, you're not going to get a good reaction.
The order came from Speaker Trevor Mallard after Mr Peters attended the 23-day occupation on Parliament's grounds in February. Well, Mr Peters joins me now. Mr Peters, you've been deemed a security risk, a trespasser. What did you think when you opened that envelope?
We're going to go further on. The answer to that first question is Mr Peters thought it was a joke to start off with. So we'll get to more of that shortly. But yeah, look, I think actually News Hub has thrown her under the bus a little bit because there's a very easy way, as you might see with our broadcast today, seeing I started the live stream before we started the actual music playing, that you can go into YouTube and just cut the start. They could have cut that off and removed her very small faux pas, not a big deal in the real world, but when you're talking to people like Winston Peters, it can become a big deal to him, at least, and you can get a different reaction from him about that. So we'll go through some of these conversations that he had about yesterday, and then we'll talk about the substance of banning people from Parliament. The interviewer basically asked Mr Peters why he was at Parliament grounds.
Well, the reality is that people had all their reasons to be there, but I was asked by the protesters to come and speak to them. And you remember at the time, every other member of the present Parliament had said that they wouldn't talk to them, that agreed that they would boycott any conversation with them. And I couldn't believe it. And I believed that it was my duty to hear both sides of the story. But to see this blunderbuss of an act by the Speaker is something that no New Zealander should put up with. And I certainly do not intend to.
So, yeah, blunderbuss of an act that's talking about being banned from the grounds. The interviewer went on and this is a bit of I'll give you an example now how Mr. Winston can be very prickly as well. The interviewer went on to ask a question. What happened was there was a proposal put forward that maybe former MPs shouldn't come under the same ban because, to have an MP come back on the grounds, or maybe someone like Mr. Peters may be in after the next election, it creates problems. So there was a proposal put forward that any former MP should not be banned from Parliament grounds, even though they're going to be banning some other people. Now, the interviewer asked him about this, and then Mr. Peters basically said in polite political terms, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And then it creates a very awkward moment where she laughs, and you can see that she thought maybe he was being lighthearted, but that's not Mr. Peters' style. So this is now a little bit of that, and I'm going to include her question in this as well, so you can see the reaction that Mr. Peters gives her. This is a little bit of a conversation now about only ACT supported you and not being banned. How did you feel about that? But she'll actually set up the question as well. Oh, I've got to share my screen. Here we go.
Well, there wasn't a lot of support forthcoming from your former parliamentary colleagues today when they met at the Parliamentary Security Committee. Only ACT was in support of an exemption for former MPs from those trespass orders. So it doesn't look promising there, Mr. Peters.
Well, I think you've entirely misread what you've just seen. With respect, you have utterly misread what you've just seen. But wait a few days and you'll find out what this means.
There's the future
New
threat.
Zealanders are not going to put up with this sort of dictatorial, absolutist behaviour.
So you believe that you do have the support of other parliamentary parties in the Parliament on this matter, aside from ACT?
Well, if they've got no idea what they're there for, then I won't have the support. If they understand now, and I'm certain that their advisors are saying, for goodness sake, wake up, this is a very bad situation, said in your name, although he's your servant, not your master, which is the distinction, then they will do what is right.
So you heard in that section as well. That's the promise of what's to come. Now, whether there will be anything to come or not, we don't know. So, George, you got anything to jump in with here? I see your mic's now off. Do you want to add
He's
conversation?
a bit rude. I mean,
He's
it's classic.
completely rude. He's
I
abrasive.
remember the first time I interviewed him, I was at Radio 1 and I was terrified. As Dunedin student radio, I was utterly terrified. And he wasn't even there. It was like over the phone. And he basically just did that. Just like every question I asked was like the most stupidest thing he'd ever heard. But yeah, he doesn't really explain. He says, you wait a couple of days. That's like a classic sort of thing. He doesn't really actually explain why the premise of her question that it's only ACT really supporting him, why that's bullshit. I will say just on the decision, I don't know if you want to talk about the decision to trespass him yet, or if we have another.
Well, what we'll also
Peter's
do
clip to get to.
Yeah, and I know I've said this to people before, and it's different, but I watch a fair bit of those American online activists who want to protect their amendment rights and their constitutional rights. So they go out and they film, police stations. They go into courthouses and they stay in the public lobbies, and they're agitators. I don't use that word in a negative, but they're looking to make sure they're allowed to do what they're allowed to do. In America, there's that very much that common thought of, if you don't use your rights, you'll lose your rights. And in America, the system is you can't be trespassed from public property unless you're breaking the law. So in other words, if you're not breaking the law, but you're making everyone uncomfortable with a camera, which is what these guys do on the internet, there's nothing anyone can do about it. But often they get arrested and then they sue the city and then they make money, and that's sort of the shtick. So I thought, what is the actual rulings in New Zealand about that? And so we thought we'd better have a look at this, and we looked it up. So this is from communitylaw.org.nz. Can I be trespassed from Parliament and other public buildings or spaces? Yes, it says you can be trespassed from public buildings and places such as Parliament, government buildings, offices, schools, libraries, and museums in the same way that a private homeowner can or business can trespass you. However, so in other words, the difference in New Zealand is you don't need to break the law to be trespassed. You can be trespassed for reasons like a business or a public home. However, there is one sort of addendum. Unlike being trespassed by a private landowner or occupier, you're protected to some extent by the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. If you are trespassed from public places, the decision to trespass you must be reasonably taken into account your rights of freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of expression under the Bill of Rights. So I guess that's the part that if you're in a public place, the trespass has to be reasonable around your rights of freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. And of course, walking through the grounds of a protest, I don't think fits in with those whatsoever. I think you'll find what the Speaker of the House has just done has given Winston Peters a massive platform to make him look like an absolute goose when this gets overturned in a heartbeat. I don't know how anyone can be trespassed from a public place because they walked through an event that was happening. So
it's fucking stupid what they've done. It's Winston Peters. You know that he's going to spend, weeks and weeks, months and months doing the whole legal thing, being on the news, talking about how Trevor Mallard's Hitler, which he did this morning on Morning Report. I can't believe the thinking. I mean, his thinking was that he just popped in for a quick chat with the protesters. He wasn't there in any sustained capacity, and I just don't understand. I think maybe the Prime Minister she's tried to sort of distance herself from Trevor Mallard's decision and the Parliamentary Services decision, but that's just totally. I mean, there's a sort of pattern here with Trevor Mallard's handling of the protest. like everything was done. Why did you have to bring this all up again by banning Winston Peters from Parliament? It seems totally miscalculated. Like that there's no sort of long-term thinking going on there, or thinking about it. They've probably got some sort of Mallard's. It's not hard to imagine that he's got some sort of old bone to pick with Winston.
I
This
think
is
that's
just
fairly obvious. I think it's
yeah.
fairly obvious that looks like there's something. Because I mean, like going back to that definition, I'll bring it back up from community law, like freedom of peaceful assembly. You can't really argue that even if he was considered assembling, he probably wasn't, because he was walking through the protest, but he certainly was doing it peacefully. Now, the people who got involved at the riot at the end, burning and throwing and that kind of stuff, completely can see how they cross over the criteria, the metric for them being banned from there for 2 years. 100% can see that. Criminal activity, no longer peaceful, didn't have a freedom of expression when you're taking a part in a riot. Completely get that. But people who there would have been school kids, and although there was many saying that the school kids were getting hassled, but there would have been school kids who walked through that ground at some stage whilst that was going on. Are they up for being trespassed if they could be identified? Of course they wouldn't. Of course, it's about who he is and what he did by attending. So I think that the speaker, and as you say, this has given ammunition to Mr. Peters as well. Last night on that News Hub item that I was playing, he also talked about duck hunting season started yesterday. Talking about Mallard, duck hunting season started yesterday. He's going to take Mallard down. He's an abrasive curmudgeon of a man at the best of times. But if the old man's going to scream, "Get off my lawn," and if what you do is go and stand on his lawn on purpose, then you're giving him a reason to scream, "Get off my lawn." And I think that's exactly what this is. And if you've got a good reason to say, "Get off my lawn," then the actual curmudgeon is in the right, and you're giving them credibility, and you're giving them the ability to go, "Do you see why I keep yelling, 'Get off my lawn'?"
Yeah.
So he'll play this out.
In terms of the election as well, I mean, I know Trevor Mallard and the parliamentary services, or Trevor Mallard especially, tried to keep up the sort of platonic ideal that they're somehow apolitical. But Trevor Mallard is first and foremost a politician and will calculate his decisions that way. He's a loyal Labour Party politician. He's one of the big names in that party. And it's totally just, again, I think of often think of these things through the lens of my grandmother watching the 6 p.m. news, who loves Winston Peters but votes for Labour, right? This is going to sort of continue or exacerbate any sort of perception that Labour overreached, or even just the slightest sort of vague feeling that they are somehow overreaching in their powers, right? It doesn't even have to be a concrete sort of rational sort of thought. It's just when it comes to an election, people get these ideas through just seeing these random headlines every day, and we'll get this idea that Trevor Mallard equals Hitler.
And let's be honest, and I don't say this from a personal point of view, but I say this from observer, and I guess on some levels you'd say someone who commentates and keeps an eye on politics quite clearly. Winston Peters is done in politics, right? He's done, unless he gets given the oxygen to make something bigger than it is and be brought back into the public eye. Would anyone be talking about Winston Peters today if he hadn't been served with this notice, which he initially thought was a joke, which is actually going to be overturned, and he's going to be vindicated and proved, he can then set himself up as the maverick outsider who'll hold to account all these lifelong politicians, and they've done. It's a little bit like Trevor Mallard turning on the sprinklers at Parliament. It just actually made him look ridiculous. It damaged the ground more than it was. It was a poor decision, and I think this equally is a poor decision. And I'm not going to accept things like, everyone got one and everyone who was identified was trespassed, because the truth is Winston Peters walking through the grounds whilst a protest was happening, is not Winston Peters involved in the protest being therefore able to be, excluded from those grounds for 2 years because he wasn't, peacefully assembling. It's just, I mean, I don't want to sound like too much of a patronizing wanker, but it's really unintelligent politics from Trevor Mallard. It's dumb. It's just dumb politicking. And the only people it's going to help are Winston Peters.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't there in any sustained effort. He was there just, just as he puts it, he was there because the protesters had asked to speak to him.
Yeah.
I know the protesters were doing that weird thing of like, they'd be at schools, like, heaping abuse on Jacinda and yelling, "Why don't you talk to us?" while calling her a cunt. It's like,
yeah, that was on the West Coast, wasn't it? We saw that. That was
yeah.
around the same sort of time.
Why don't you come talk to us? It's like, well,
yeah.
But
we got a comment here. I agree that the order will be quickly revoked by Mallard will announce his intention to retire at the end of Parliament. I don't know if those two things will be connected, but I think his upcoming retire. I think that Trevor Mallard's been out of vogue for a couple of elections now. And the speakership was probably a bit of a payoff to to sign. Yeah, I mean, for the rest of his life and whatever he does after Parliament, he can, the Speaker of the House is a pretty impressive title to have on your resume, whether that's moving into other political situations like Louisa Ward or whether that's business.
This is a sort of nail on the coffin sort of thing, though. I think that the comment, right, that this could, like, this, as you said before, it's pretty fucking dumb.
Yeah. Yeah, it's dumb, and it makes Mallard look vindictive and petty. It's a little bit like the sprinklers. It's actually Trevor. It's like I've talked about the old man, get off my grass. I was using that example to talk about Winston, but it's exactly actually what Trevor Mallard's done as well. Get off my grass, literally for a portion of the protest, and then figuratively to try and do the same sort of thing when it comes to, the trespass orders. Now, I'll say it again, some of the trespass orders completely warranted and valid. If you're involved with the protest at the end, then you should be excluded for a couple of years from that property. No question. Did I say the protest at the end? I mean the riot at the end. Without question. But someone just attending the protest and walking through for 30 minutes, that's the other thing. For 30 minutes, it's ludicrous. It's a ludicrous attempt to silence someone whilst at the same time pouring fuel onto the fire to give him exposure and a chance. Because every media outlet in the country will want to talk to him now because it's a good headline. So, yeah, you certainly haven't achieved what you thought you would have achieved, Mr. Mallard. And if you'd played that kind of, we didn't have any way of, cutting out some of the people, it was all or nothing, then that's horseshit. Because there's always ways. Because greatest of respect, if it was just some clerk in an office and they saw former Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters come across their desk, they would not just go ka-chink, ka-chink. They'd go, hey boss, are you sure about this one? Because this is Winston Peters. It's Occam's razor. It's unlikely that it's just a clerical thing, which is probably what they'll try and sell it as. But anyway. So still to come this hour, we're going to be talking about Roe versus Wade in America. Got a bunch of stuff to show you about that. And we have the president of the National Council of Women of New Zealand joining us to talk about, women's access to things like health, including abortions as well. She's not coming on necessarily to talk about the pending decision, but it's all tied in with what we're going to do. I think we should look right now, though, at another sort of story in the New Zealand political world, and it's one that I'm sort of intrigued with. It's a conversation that we sort of started yesterday, surrounding things like identity politics and what is a political party's core values and core policy. We sort of did we criticize? I think we observed yesterday Christopher Luxon having his it was one of his pre-budget speeches the day that the biggest climate issue news was released in New Zealand for a very long time, and him not talking about climate at all, because he was basically saying economic development is our cornerstone. That's what we want to talk about. That's what we want to focus on, and saying that the economic side of New Zealand's world, is going to solve all the other problems. I mean, I'm not saying I agree with that or you agree with that, but that's sort of what he was saying. And what is the foundation that National are going to build their policies on? What is the foundation that Labor are going to build their policies on? There's research out of America that I talked about on Friday, I think. You can go back and have a look at it. Looking at why working class voters were leaving the Democrats and not voting for Democrats. And the answer that the research found, was from a left-wing group, was that if your foundational cornerstone policies, if the things you're saying, if you can identify this party by 3 things, if those 3 things are, and I think the word woke is a bullshit word, but it's the word that the actual research used. So if those 3 things are woke, then working class people won't vote for you. That's what their research showed. Now, I'm not saying that any one party has like those cornerstone policies all being that, but I guess when me and you talked about it, George, we talked about maybe rather than the word woke, or maybe far left or whatever, maybe identity. If your core policies are like what people refer to as identity politics, then you're shrinking your base of support significantly, because if what people hear is identity politics as how to identify this party, they will more likely go with a party where they hear, if it's on the right, tax cuts, maybe on the left it would be working for families and but economic issues, if they're the foundation, if they're what you are, you're more likely to have a broad base than if they were more narrow and more woke. So that was kind of the conversation. George, do you want to add anything to that? Because I'm kind of setting up for the next thing, but that was sort of where we've come from. Is that fair?
Yeah. I guess the other part of that conversation was, realizing the special interest parties that we have in MMP, right? That was the other part of that conversation, that it's not the job of the Green Party or ACT to be big tent parties, as they sort of call them in Europe. The parties like Labor and National that are set up as parties of governing, rather than parties that are purposely created and function on the premise that they will be the smaller party in a coalition government or in a.
I'd like to ask those questions to David Seymour and perhaps to the co-leaders of the Greens, because I feel like if you're always a small party, if you go, we're going to be a small party, and by small, let's say 5 to 20 MPs or 5 to 15 MPs, then you're never going to be able to bring change like you would ultimately want to if you could. I wonder if you said to all of them, in an ideal world, would you like to be the majority party? I think they'd all say yes. I guess that then marries up against the reality of could they ever be? And maybe that's what you're saying, they never could be, so they have to be happy with their lot. Like, for 3 Olympics in a row, the best you could do in the 100-meter sprint was silver. So your silver, because of Usain Bolt, was going to be your gold because he was going to win the gold. And being happy with the silver, is that good enough? Or do you still ultimately really want to win that gold? But I hear what you're saying. I think you're talking about a reality of what will be with smaller parties. And I'm just thinking maybe a little bit one step back. If you ask those parties, would they like to be a major party? They'd probably all say yes. So I don't know how
yeah, of course. But they're dealing with the political reality and how the MMP system was set up, right? These are parties that have their origins in the MMP system, and they're there to agitate and also support their chosen governments and be there as the kingmaker, which is very good leverage for getting your policies in the governing party.
I think it's very good leverage for getting 1 or 2 policies in your party. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. I think we've seen maybe with the Green and Labor partnership that it hasn't always gone the way of the Greens, and
yeah. The most important headline from this page we're looking at is this one up here. Someone who's just won $13 million in Lotto is going to donate to charity and buy a new car. I'm like, maybe we should set ourselves up as a charitable trust, George. Maybe they could help a brother out a little bit. So anyway, the story we're going to talk about is the Green Party. They're dropping their male co-leader rule and adding a Māori requirement. The Green Party has removed a rule which requires one of its co-leaders to be male, which the party says affirms its commitment to provide leadership opportunities for non-binary and intersex people. Okay, let's just start from the beginning. Why I guess what I was trying to think when it says this affirms its commitment to provide leadership opportunities. There is already leadership opportunities for anybody. I mean, if you're a non-binary intersex person, the Greens aren't saying you couldn't be leader now. So I'm thinking about this and thinking about why and what they're doing. But no one obviously within the Greens and no one outside the Greens looking in would go, oh, a non-binary person could not be leader there. So they already have that opportunity. So I'd wonder why this affirms the commitment to provide leadership opportunities.
Because it changes the literal language in the party documents, right? I think that's what's happened. Is they've just changed some words. That's where all these news stories are quoting, is they've changed the words around to be how they say more inclusive for non-binary and intersex people.
One of the debates between, I guess, the left and the right for a lot of the time seems to be the difference between the equality of opportunity and the equality of outcomes, right? And I would say right now, before this there was an equality of opportunity for a non-binary person to be a leader in the Greens, wouldn't you think? Because that's decided within the Greens.
Yeah, and they wanted to reflect that in the language of their constitution or whatever they're working out with their special group at the moment.
Story goes on to say the party originally had a requirement to have one male co-leader and one female co-leader. One co-leader would still need to be female. However, now the other person can be of any gender. Now, I guess I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to be the guy saying get off your lawn right now, but I know what this is going to do within the public discourse. They're going to go, and I also know the rationale and reasons behind it. If you want to talk about the patriarchy and especially men running the world for the past 2,000 plus years, I get all of that. But I know one of the comments is going to be, why don't they just have no requirements for leadership and make it an equal opportunity for everyone? Why do they make it a female and other rather than just let's have no requirements at all and then everyone can get in there? But maybe they have a requirement that says it can't be the same. So you couldn't be two males or two females, or I guess that means it couldn't be two non-binary or whatever. But the idea that one group is now completely excluded and everyone else is included. So basically, yeah, that's going to be one of the questions that's asked in society. And this is what we're talking about what your benchmark as a party is and what you can be identified as will either draw people to you or push people away. Anything, George?
Yeah, I just if I was in the special general meeting, and I have talked to people in the special general meeting, which has representatives from around the country, Green Party members from around the country. My opinion probably would have just been to leave it open, right? Just to have a little passage that says we have two leaders instead of one, because that gives us an opportunity to have two different people in a leadership role, and sort of leave it at that and don't have the requirements. And from talking to people in the special general meeting, I do know that there were some people that were, maybe a little bit tired of having to spend time on shit like this, rather than
for people who don't know, if you go into a Green Party meeting, and I've never been in one, but I've had a first-hand accounts of people who've been in them. Let's say it's a 3-hour long meeting. They spend a shit ton of time on these kinds of conversations, like a lot of time on these kinds of conversations. Whereas if you go into, let's say, a National Party meeting, they probably spend a shit ton of time on how to get tax cuts. So that's when I'm talking about what you earmark around how to identify a party and how it draws people into you. The other thing is they also include a rule that one co-leader is Māori. And I kind of look at this like I'm maybe my logic sometimes is unhelpful, but I look at it as an ideal. Like, let's just say in the future, people of Māori ancestry all started to gravitate towards the Māori party, and in the Greens there wasn't actually a really good candidate to be leader, but because they've got this in their constitution now, they have to have someone who's Māori as a co-leader, and it's setting up a position where you could also get hamstrung. It is setting up a position where you could also create diversity, and that could be a good thing, but it is also setting up a situation where you could be hamstrung. And the question I'd like to know, if I had a Green Party member with us today, what I'd be saying is, you've still drawn a line, All right. It used to be a line between male, female, right? Now it's a line between female, other. There is still a line there. So it's not actual equal opportunity and representation because, for example, why doesn't one of the leaders need to be disabled? I mean, that's equally an underrepresented group and a group that wants to be in there. And it's not something that they've drawn to. And I'm not saying that as it's good or bad, right or wrong. But what I'm saying is lines have still been drawn to exclude some people. Why have they drawn that line? Why have they decided that? I'd be interested to know that from the Green Party if anyone's watching.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion as a former member, I'm just not a member at the moment because I haven't bothered, would be that it's really of little consequence. And I guess it's a way of putting in literal writing a rule that is meant to reflect your sort of philosophy
Values.
and ethos and values as a party, and in that way, yeah, sweet as whatever. But in another way, it's just more fucking rigmarole. It's just it's tiresome, and it means that it means we have to talk about it.
A wise man once said to me, when words and actions disagree, believe the actions. And I think sometimes you're talking about, demonstrating the ethos and the what they're trying to do. If they just demonstrate it, if they just did it, all of this wouldn't need to be talked about. If they just had that was part of what they did, then they wouldn't need to have in writing rules about what they should do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you put in the rules to sort of support you on the way to that ideal. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think we'll probably return to this tomorrow when we talk about things like diversity consultants and huge corporations and stuff like that, which is cool. Which I'm looking forward to. Yeah, cool.
All right. Let's move into our next conversation. We are going to be talking a bit about the Roe versus Wade decision. Suzanne Manning, who is the president of the National Council of Women of New Zealand, is going to be joining us in a couple of minutes. But before Suzanne gets in, I wanted to show you a couple of videos of what's been happening in the US overnight. Now, this is the first story I want to show you. It's from MSNBC. I'm not going to show you much of this, but the decision, the leaked document of a prospective decision came out, and 2 minutes later, these guys were on air. So that came out, let's say we start at 11 a.m. So at 10:58, the decision came out, or the leaked document came out, and these guys went to air. And I just thought it would be interesting to show you all what literal breaking news about this was when it was within minutes of being released.
We have huge breaking news tonight, and I can't even believe I'm going to tell you what I'm about to tell you. But in a highly, indeed, as far as I can tell, utterly unprecedented leak from the Supreme Court, Politico has obtained what they say is an initial draft majority opinion written by Justice Alito showing the Supreme Court striking down Roe versus Wade. Quote, Roe was egregiously wrong from the start, Alito writes. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled, he writes in the document labeled as the opinion of the court. Again, I'm reading from the Politico article. It is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. Now, Politico mentions this in a piece. This has never happened before, as far as I know, a draft opinion of the court leaking, A. B, this would be, if true, the most seismic court ruling in 50 years, most likely. Earthquake in the lives of America's women.
I think that we've got a gist for how it came out and what they were talking about it at the start. Here is a few other broadcasters breaking the news story in America yesterday.
Breaking news, an abortion bombshell hitting tonight. Politico publishing a report saying a draft opinion circulated among Supreme Court justices suggests that Roe v. Wade should be overturned.
An initial draft majority opinion written by Justice Alito showing the Supreme Court striking down Roe versus Wade.
I don't want to hear the...
We'll come back to this. This is a TikToker in America as well. She has some interesting things to say about it. Not that TikTok is the bastion of all things informative, but she had an interesting perspective on this. And just so you know, this is the SCOTUS document, and it does indeed say we hold that Roe and Casey, which is another case that strengthened Roe versus Wade must be overruled. The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one on which the defenders of Roe and Casey now chiefly rely. Now, we're going to jump in to have this conversation with Suzanne Manning in a sec, but before we do, what I would say, George, is at the very start of it, which we showed, people were saying, oh, if this is true, but I think one of the reasons you know it's true now is that supporters of this ban are focusing on how dare this be released rather than focusing on this is not true. So
talking about the leak,
on Fox News, that sort of place, are trying to make the story this is an illegal action, that this has been released, rather than make the story we've contacted the courts, this is fake. So I would say at the moment that this is true and this is accurate. It's not law yet. It potentially could be law. There could be changes on the way through to law. But I think that the leak that came out that Politico released yesterday, all evidence shows that it's true and accurate as to where the majority ruling in the Supreme Court is today.
Yeah, and for those those people wondering, and before I jump out for the interview, there's Roe versus Wade is basically the federal protections that sort of, in some way, maybe override state level legislation on abortion. I think I'm right in saying that, Pat, right? So now with the overturn of Roe versus Wade, state legislative and judicial branches, etc., will have much more powers when it comes to reproductive rights and abortion in that state alone, and it shows the power in America that the judicial branch has, and the power, and maybe we'll talk about this later on or tomorrow, the power that that Trump had in installing conservative judges in the Supreme Court.
Yeah. All right, let's welcome to the show now Suzanne Manning. Suzanne is the president of the National Council of Women of New Zealand. Suzanne, thank you for joining us today.
Kia ora. Nice to be here, Pete.
Yeah. Hey, now I know that when we talked this morning, you weren't too much up on the play with the news, which is understandable. It was sort of breaking overnight. But you were watching. We were due to come to you about now, and you got to see the setup as well. So you were watching. Any reactions on what you've just seen?
It's like one step forward, two steps back all the time. It's every time there is a human rights issue that feminism makes a win, somebody comes along later, in this case 50 years later, and tries to overturn it. When does a right become a right that stays instead of people relitigating it all the time?
I guess
my reaction to this.
Unfortunately, in America, people are talking about, in America, that people are talking about how, you get these kind of people at the moment who try and reference the Constitution like it's the Bible, sometimes both figuratively and literally, and that it's unquestionable. But they need to have pointed out to them that that's why they're called amendments, because the Constitution's been changed on the way through. But I guess the thing is, if it's been changed on the way through to give amendments, then it can be changed back, or it can be changed to other things. So when is a right actually a right? I guess within the American context, which is what we're talking about, they have the ability within their laws to go, we can amend whatever it is we're doing. And I think it would appear to me that the situation in America is what they're going to be saying is, we're not banning abortions, we're giving the states the right to decide, because they have this thing called states' rights. And because of that, all the Republican states will ban abortion and all the Democratic states will not. So let's say half of the country, 175 million people, so half of those will be women. So 80 million women, females, because I guess some won't be of reproductive age, will be under a situation where they will not have access to abortions. And I wanted to also bring up a part of your website, and you say very clearly, as a part of the job of the Council of Women, is that you are about safety and health, and one of your criteria is in here are access to healthcare, including abortion. So for those who maybe aren't in this conversation on a daily basis, access to abortion is now accepted as normal healthcare, not like anything beyond that.
That is, that's the law at the moment. And that is the position of Te Kaunihira Wahine o Aotearoa, the National Council of Women. We have had many debates on this over many years. We are a representative organisation of women in Aotearoa, so we have a variety of views. We have people who are totally opposed to abortion. We have people who absolutely want it on demand. And so for us to find a position that fairly represents what our members consider should be the case, it has been a long road. But a few years ago, we did do this. We wanted it to be seen as a health issue. It is not a criminal issue as far as we're concerned. Abortion is about the health of woman and child, because women and their reproductive systems are something to be taken seriously and to be looked after in as many ways as possible. But we consider that the woman is the best person to know about her own body, her own situation, and to make her own decisions. She needs support. She needs advice and care and support and access. There are so many things about that, but ultimately the National Council of Women believe that it's a woman's right to be supported to look after her own body's needs and the health needs of those within her. So this is a position that all of our members can agree on, even though they wish the ultimate decision maybe to be different depending on your point of view. It's that principle, and it's that principle that Roe versus Wade is basically overturning, saying no, it's not actually a healthcare thing that a woman should decide. This is something that the states will decide for you. For a libertarian, freedom-loving country, it seems a bit weird.
Well, if we've got time afterwards, once we say thanks to you, I've got some other stuff to show, which is basically the stats around who supports abortion in America. And every demographic, it's more than 50%, other than white evangelicals. Every other demographic. And then if you include the white evangelicals into the major population, even with their opposition, it's still for the whole population above 50%. So when you talk about, liberty-loving democracy, this is one of the things I bang on about, is how can you have a democratic country that takes 60% of the view of the population, or 70% or 80%, and then rule against it. It doesn't. And I mean, I'm not saying we go by mob rule. Sometimes the minority view needs to be represented as well. But in this situation, it seems to be a bit of a no-brainer, which is also apparently what the Supreme Court's into, no-brainers.
Yeah.
So
there
wanted to
is
ask,
one point.
Yeah, go.
Can I just make a comment on that the bit that I saw beforehand, that the court is saying it's time to return this to elected representatives. Yet the point of separation of courts and parliament is so that you get the politicking out of fundamental issues like this. Women's health rights shouldn't be mucked around with who's got the most money to buy a politician, which, I might be wrong, but that's my understanding of politics in the States. It costs money to get elected. If you've got money, you control your politicians. So this idea that it is better to go to elected representatives, no, there should be a separation. The principle we're talking about here should be legally enshrined and left there.
I watched a clip once when Jon Stewart was hosting The Daily Show, and I can't remember who he had on, but it was a Republican politician. And they were talking about same-sex marriage. And he was like, and Jon Stewart was like, look, I understand the abortion issue for you guys is more difficult. But he was going, but what's the problem with same-sex marriage? In other words, John Stewart was saying that I know the abortion issue is a difficult conversation amongst society, but he was kind of going, but people getting married, no big deal. They're grown adults. So it just made me think while you were talking, why do you think this is such a difficult conversation? The abortion issue seems to be a conversation within society that is perhaps the most, you never bring that up across the dinner table sort of thing for most people. It is the thing. And I believe this in America, that is a single voting issue for a lot of those white Protestants. If you say you're pro-life, then they will vote for you no matter what other horrific thing you've done with your mistress or your gay lover or your tax things or whatever pussy you've grabbed from whatever, in the back of the bus that's been said by a president. They'll forgive all of that if you just say pro-life. I really believe it's a one vote issue for many who are evangelical Christians. And I wonder, why do you think this is such a, you may not think it's a difficult conversation from your perspective, but within society, it feels like such a difficult conversation still today.
It always is a difficult conversation because it's emotional things. You get children at taonga. You get the tamariki. You get a baby in your hands, and the emotions that invokes is huge. And so that overlays so much of what we're talking about. People see a baby that has not been born, but they do not see the circumstances that led to that baby's conception. So rape or no rape, it doesn't matter. They do not see the life that baby might have because of being born in a particular situation. It becomes a black and white emotional I love babies thing, whereas actually it is much more nuanced than that, and there are so many more decisions to be made. So the principle is not the life of the baby over everybody else's needs and life, but it's a holistic looking at what is the situation and what is the best for the well-being of all concerned. And that's an issue that the woman needs to be making. But we love babies. So it comes in every time. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, babies make themselves adorable. So, hey, they get to live. But at the same time, it's way more complicated. We don't like complicated. That's the other thing. People don't like having difficult conversations. People like a black and white, this is how it's going to be, and I'm right, you're wrong. It's not like that.
Yeah. Hey, finally, and thanks for being with us today. Assuming this gets put in place as new law in America,
Oh, please.
and
No.
how we see America influencing the world. There's that adage that I use a lot: when America sneezes, the world catches a cold, which is not a good analogy to use in the day of COVID, but you know what I'm saying. And you are seeing things like, especially over the last 2 years around COVID, mis and disinformation coming out of America affecting the Western world. You're seeing it in New Zealand. It does impact conversations here. You're seeing politicians pick up some of those talking points that are being used in America and landing, so they use them here. Do you have a fear or a concern that if this passes in America, and it's looking like it would, so let's just hypothetically say it does, that it could have some flow on to New Zealand and influence our laws and what we're doing here? Could it revitalize people on the right to try and change laws in New Zealand or impact us in any way?
I think that happens all the time anyway, and this is only one of the latest things that are happening. We're continually fighting those battles. That's what the National Council of Women does on a day-to-day basis. So I actually have confidence in the people of Aotearoa to be able to have those conversations, to push back against misinformation, to actually converse and listen. I see it more in our politicians than I do in some other countries, where actually debate doesn't often descend into personal attacks. Well, it does do that, but but there is also a good bit of actually discussing the evidence, actually discussing the facts, actually discussing what people think. I'm seeing it happen more often, and that gives me hope for the future that we'll be able to withstand this. Sure, there's going to be a pressure come on, but we can also push back against it. To have proper conversations, that's all we really need to do. Actually listen to each other and accept that it's not black and white, that there's greys to talk about.
President of the National Council of Women of New Zealand, Suzanne Manning. Suzanne, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you giving us some time.
Thank
and
you.
Also jumping in. I mean, I called you out of the blue this morning. I could have been any rando weirdo with an agenda, but thank you for trusting us and jumping in and being a part of the conversation. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me.
All right. Now, look, I'm going to play. We do need to shoot quite quickly here today. Georgia, if you want to jump back in, you're welcome to or not, because I do have an appointment to get to at 1 o'clock. But I think I would just like to finish off this conversation, because one thing that hasn't really come up is the idea of, I said I was going to play the end of this commentary from this TikToker, the idea of the decisions that the American people make for president, how they can impact days like today.
I don't want to hear the phrase elections don't matter anymore. Because look where the 2016 election just got us. A drafted opinion from the Supreme Court was leaked, and it has them overturning Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And that's not me speculating, because in the draft, it quite literally says we hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. And instead, it says it is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. AKA, it would no longer be a constitutional right, but would allow for the disgusting states of Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, pretty much every state in the South.
Just purely for the time, we'll let that go and just get it. But the point that she made at the start, I think, is something that's worth thinking about, especially for Americans. It's different here in New Zealand because we have a different system, but because the president basically nominates the justices and then the Senate and Congress choose to steal one off Obama, then you're put in this situation where it does really, truly impact. And I mean, if this is on the block now, Roe versus Wade, then anything's on the block. And it means that literally for the next 10, 20, 30 years, a conservative justice, a conservative court, Supreme Court in America, which swings conservative, could actually very, very, very rapidly change the, could absolutely change how America runs, what America is, and make it. So the point that she made, which I thought was interesting, and I wanted to sort of acknowledge it, was it just goes to show how important that presidential elections are for Americans, because it can lead to days like today.
One thing I'll say before we go is that there's been this interesting sort of line of attack. Well, it's very common for when things like this happen. We see Democrats they blame people like Bernie or Susan Sarandon or something like this, right, for not voting for Hillary or damaging Hillary, because then we would have won the Democrats would have won in 2016, would have people on the Supreme Court, you know, to your point you've just made. And the problem with that is the Democrats love to attack the left rather than their enemies, the Republicans who actually make these changes in the Supreme Court. But the other point is that there's been massive Democratic majorities where they could have codified laws like Roe versus Wade with their massive support that, you know, for example, Obama had, you know, a huge legislative majority and did nothing when it came to the sort of Planned Parenthood or that sort of thing. So when people see people criticizing, you know, Susan Sarandon for not voting for Hillary Clinton as the reason that shit like this happens, just keep that in mind and maybe think to yourself, why are the Democrats and the liberals always so quick to blame things like this on the left rather than the right, the people who are actually doing it?
Yeah. I said I was going to get to some research and stuff, which I said I've got to shoot off today, but quickly. But look, this is, if you look up Forbes.com. Maybe I'll try and put this in my Twitter feed today. But there is information all the way down that's about all sorts of partisan splits all the way through. But the headline, the top line says this: broad support for abortion rights. Gallup poll shows Americans' support for abortion in all or most cases at 80% in May of 2021, only slightly higher than 1975, which was 76%. And the Pew Research Center finds 59% of adults believe abortion should be legal compared to 60% in 1995, though there have been some fluctuation with support dropping to a low of 47 in 2009. So broad support for this across the board. It is, as we said, one of those conversations that does get tricky and difficult, and I'm not entirely sure why. Well, I do kind of know why, but I don't think it should. Before we shoot off, let's put a few comments out there that have come in. Religion, no. Right-wing extremism, that some religious sects attached to, not just Christian. Sure. Having a secular constitution is crazy. How religion sure rules the US, and that's very true. Interesting that just days before the two comments from Gorich regarding legislative racism in regards to Puerto Rico and First Nations rights. Coincidence? And then this is probably the place we'll leave it. Time to storm the courts. So there you go. We're done for today. Thanks, guys, for joining us. We appreciate your input today. We'll be back tomorrow morning with, is it Wednesday today? It is. So Jeremy Elwood with us tomorrow, having a chat about life, the universe, and everything, as we do in Big Hairy News. Thank you for being with us. A little heads up. Next week, we are going to go to midday. We did decide that, didn't we, George?
Mm-hmm.
We made that decision? Okay.
Yep.
So next week, we're going to run this from midday to 1 rather than 11 to 12. We're just going to tutu with it. And I'll tell you something, the week after that, we're probably going to run it at 10 p.m. We're just because we're in what we're calling a soft launch at the moment. We're trying this thing out, seeing if you people want it, you enjoy it. So that's the next thing we're going to do. So next week, not this week, tomorrow we're back at 11, but next week we'll be running from midday to 1. And the following week, we'll be doing it at 10 p.m. An evening chat to see if people want to join in then as well. Just a heads up for you guys. All right, team, that's us. It is time to head off, to go off and have lunch. And other than that, stay safe, everybody. We'll catch you tomorrow morning from 11. Thank you, George. Thank you, Susan, for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you tomorrow. Hooroo.